You know what's strange? We talk endlessly about generations. We argue about boomers. We analyze millennials. We dissect Gen Z like it's a brand new species that needs constant explanation. But there's an entire generation that sits quietly in the middle, rarely discussed, almost invisible. Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. They're your older coworkers who don't complain, your parents who seem oddly detached at times, the people who helped build the modern world, but don't feel the need to narrate their lives online. And their psychology might be the most misunderstood of any living generation. To understand Generation X, you have to understand the environment they were shaped by. Picture this. It's the late 1970s. You're 8 or 9 years old. You come home from school to an empty house. Both parents are working. There are no smartphones, no cameras, no way for anyone to check in. You let yourself in, you make a snack, you do your homework alone, and you wait. By the early 1980s, millions of children were living this exact routine every day. This wasn't neglect in the dramatic sense. It was simply normal. And that normality did something subtle but powerful to the developing mind. It taught self-reliance early. But more importantly, it taught contingency. Actions had consequences, and those consequences arrived quickly. There was no buffer, no negotiation, no emotional processing afterward. If you crossed a line, you knew it immediately. The rules were firm and feelings were secondary. Psychologists describe this as a high contingency environment, a world where behavior and outcome are tightly linked. Growing up in that kind of system trains the brain to anticipate consequences in real time. That's one reason Gen X tends to think several steps ahead. They learned early that you don't get endless retrees. You don't talk your way out of reality. You adapt, or you deal with the fallout. And at the same time, they were watching something else unfold. They heard constant messages about stability, about loyalty, about doing the right thing and being rewarded for it. And then they watched those promises collapse. Divorce rates surged. Corporations downsized without hesitation. Long careers ended with a cardboard box and a handshake. Institutions that claimed permanence proved to be temporary. So Gen X internalized a quiet lesson. Don't fully trust the system. This didn't turn them into pessimists in the dramatic sense. It turned them into realists. Hope was allowed, but expectations were managed. Optimism existed, but it was cautious. This is why they rarely broadcast their inner lives. They grew up in a world where privacy was assumed. When you made a mistake, only a few people knew. It didn't follow you forever. There was no permanent record, no audience. So, visibility never felt empowering to them. It felt dangerous. Keeping parts of yourself unknown wasn't avoidance, it was protection. That mindset shows up everywhere, especially in humor. Generation X mastered irony. Not because they were detached for fun, but because irony creates distance, and distance feels safe when the world has shown you how quickly certainty can disappear. They grew up practicing nuclear drills under desks, being told everything was fine while adults quietly prepared for catastrophe. Holding two conflicting realities at once became second nature. And yet, despite all of this, Generation X developed an unusually strong relationship with work. Not performative work, not identity-driven work, competence-based work. They started early. Paper routes before sunrise, fast food jobs where mistakes mattered, jobs where responsibility arrived long before adulthood. These weren't framed as character-building experiences. They were just life. And life required you to show up, figure it out, and deliver. Watching their parents give loyalty to companies that offered none in return shaped a very specific mindset. They don't believe in institutional loyalty. They believe in personal value. You can't control layoffs. You can control whether you're useful, whether you're skilled, whether you're hard to replace. That's why Gen X doesn't talk much about their work ethic. They don't post about it. They don't brand it. They simply do the work. There's a quiet paradox at the center of this generation. They are fiercely independent, yet deeply dependable. They rarely ask for help, not because they don't need it, but because needing help feels like failure. Self-reliance became a reflex, but when someone else needs help, they show up, without announcement, without recognition, without expecting anything in return. This comes from growing up in peer-based support systems. Friends mattered because adults weren't always present. Loyalty was personal, not institutional. Their relationship with authority reflects this. They don't respect titles, they respect competence. If you know what you're doing, they'll follow you. If you don't, your position means nothing. This skepticism wasn't learned from theory, it was learned from watching authority figures fail publicly and repeatedly. They lived through political scandals, economic instability, and institutional mismanagement. Trust had to be earned, not assumed. Economically, Generation X has been hit again and again. The oldest entered adulthood during recessions. The youngest graduated into the collapse of the dot-com bubble. Many hit their financial stride just as the 2008 crisis wiped it out. This repeated instability created a mindset of redundancy, multiple skills, multiple income streams, not out of ambition, but out of caution. Nothing lasts. Psychological research shows that Gen X is less likely to seek social support during stress, not because they lack relationships, but because asking feels like weakness. The habit of handling things alone became deeply ingrained. Their relationship with information reflects this too. Before instant access, knowledge required effort, time, physical presence, searching, waiting. That effort changed how information was valued. What you worked to learn stayed with you. It became integrated, not skimmed. They learned to fix things because there was no alternative. You didn't outsource problems, you engaged them directly, with your hands, with patience. And now they're watching their children grow up in a world of constant supervision, constant visibility, constant assistance. They gave their kids what they didn't have: attention, protection, availability. But sometimes they worry. Because in their worldview, visibility equals vulnerability. Dependence feels dangerous. And solitude was where competence was forged. Generation X is not better than other generations. They're different. They were shaped during a narrow window of history when the old world was fading and the new one hadn't fully arrived. They learned to bridge gaps rather than dominate narratives. And bridges rarely get credit. They just hold things together. Quietly, reliably, without asking to be seen, and maybe that's the most Generation X trait of all. Not needing recognition, just making sure things don't fall apart.